80 years, the United States Navy had no use for them. The biggest guns ever put to sea, gone, retired, turned into museums. The age of the battleship was over, and everyone knew it. And then, in December of 2025, the President of the United States stood up and said one word that nobody in the Navy expected to hear again: battleships. A brand new class of them. The first American battleship designed since the Second World War. They're calling it the Trump class, and the first ship already has a name: USS Defiant. And it split the Navy right down the middle. Is this the smartest move America's made in decades? Bring back the floating fortress that takes a punch and keeps firing? Or is it a $20 billion mistake, a giant steel target in a world of hypersonic missiles? Stick with me, because to understand where this is going, you have to understand the legend it's built on. 4 ships that refuse to die, guns that could throw a small car 20 miles, and the real reason the Navy keeps coming back to the battleship when everyone says it's finished. Let's go back to where this story really starts. World War II. The United States builds 4 ships unlike anything before them: the Iowa class, the USS Iowa, the USS New Jersey, the USS Missouri, and the USS Wisconsin. Each one is 887 feet long, nearly 3 football fields. Each one displaces almost 60,000 tons at full load. And each one can do something that sounds impossible for a ship that size: move it over 33 knots. That's faster than most destroyers. These were the fastest battleships America ever built, designed to keep pace with the new fast aircraft carriers and screen them from attack, throwing up a wall of anti-aircraft fire while their big guns stayed ready for any enemy surface ship that dared come close. These ships were also built narrow for their length, just 108 feet wide, so they could squeeze through the Panama Canal, which is why they ended up so long and lean. They were wrapped in steel armor more than a foot thick in places, built to take a hit from another battleship and keep fighting. But the reason you remember the Iowa class, the reason anyone does, sits up top. 9 guns, 16 inches across, mounted in 3 massive turrets. And what those guns could do is hard to even picture. Let's actually look at what these guns could do, because the numbers don't feel real until you see them laid out. Each of those 9 16-inch guns could fire a shell weighing 2,700 pounds. That's about the weight of a small car, out to a range of 24 miles. The shell left the barrel at roughly 2,500 feet per second and came down with enough force to punch through 30 feet of solid concrete and blow a crater 50 feet wide. Now picture all 9 firing at once. A full broadside from one Iowa-class battleship threw over 24,000 pounds of steel and explosives at the enemy in a single salvo, more than 12 tons in one pull. The recoil was so violent the entire ship would visibly shift sideways in the water. Each turret was a building in itself, 3 stories tall, reaching deep below decks, weighing as much as a destroyer, and it took dozens of sailors working together just to load and fire one. And get this, those guns were aimed by analog mechanical computers, gears and cams, no silicon, no software. When the Navy tested modern digital systems against them in the 1980s, the old analog computers were so accurate they were left in place. If it works, it works. And these guns were accurate. Back in 1944, off Truk, the Iowa and New Jersey opened fire on a fleeing Japanese destroyer from about 22 miles away, their shells straddling it, one of the longest range gunnery straddles in naval history. To put that in perspective, they were bracketing a moving target the size of a city block, from a distance where the curve of the Earth itself starts to matter. There was nothing subtle about it. This was raw, overwhelming power, the kind you could feel in your chest from a mile away. And for 50 years, that power kept getting called back into service, long after the experts said the battleship was dead. Now here's the strange part about the Iowa class. Most warships serve once, then they're scrapped. These 4 kept coming back from the dead. Look at this timeline. World War II. They shield the carriers and shell Japanese islands across the Pacific, and it's on the deck of the Missouri in Tokyo Bay that Japan formally surrenders in 1945, ending the war. Then they're mothballed, supposedly done. Korea 1950, called back to pound shore targets, mothballed again. Vietnam 1968. The New Jersey returns to fire on targets near the DMZ, retired again. And then the big one, the 1980s. President Reagan wants a 600-ship Navy to face down the Soviet Union. Union, and all 4 Iowas are pulled out of retirement one more time. But this time, they get modernized. They keep the 16-inch guns, but the Navy bolts on Tomahawk cruise missiles, Harpoon anti-ship missiles, and phalanx guns to shoot down incoming threats. The old battle wagons enter the missile age, and in 1991, during the Gulf War, the Missouri and the Wisconsin do something no one had seen in decades. They fire their 16-inch guns in anger one last time alongside their Tomahawks, hammering Iraqi positions. They even flew small drones overhead to spot targets and walk the shells onto them. A 50-year-old battleship using remote-controlled aircraft to aim, decades before drones were everywhere. At one point, Iraqi troops reportedly tried to surrender to one of those drones, terrified of what came next. 4 times the world said the battleship was finished. 4 times these ships came back, but the 5th time, something was different. So why did they finally go away? Because by the 1990s, the math stopped working. The exact same problem the Navy is facing right now. Look at the costs. Reactivating all 4 battleships in the 1980s cost about $1.7 billion, and each ship needed a crew of around 1,800 sailors just to run it, at a time when newer ships did more with a fraction of the crew. And there was another problem creeping in. The Navy had stopped making the giant 16-inch shells and the powder bags that fed those guns. The supply was finite. Once it ran out, that was it. It's worth saying clearly though, these ships were never beaten in battle. No Iowa-class battleship was ever sunk by an enemy. They were retired by budgets and arithmetic, not by any foe, armored so heavily that in their entire careers, nothing ever managed to take one down. When the Cold War ended and the Soviet Union collapsed, the Navy suddenly didn't need every ship it had, and the battleships, with their massive crews and their hungry budgets, were first on the chopping block. There was also a darker reason the Navy grew cautious. In 1989, an explosion tore through the No. 2 turret of the USS Iowa, killing 47 sailors, a tragedy that reminded everyone how dangerous these aging gun systems could be. By 1992, all 4 were retired, and in 2011, the last one, the Iowa, was handed over to become a museum. The era was over. The big guns went silent. Except, the argument never actually died. Now, most people have no idea about this next part. Even after the battleships were retired, Congress refused to let the Navy get rid of them completely. For years, lawmakers ordered the Navy to keep at least 2 Iowa-class ships on a special list, the Naval Vessel Register, so they could theoretically be called back in a national emergency. Think about that. The era of the battleship was supposedly over, but the United States Congress wasn't willing to fully close the door. Why? Because the battleship offered something nothing else in the fleet could match: the ability to soak up damage and keep fighting, and to drop a staggering amount of firepower on a target for a fraction of what a missile costs. A single cruise missile can cost well over $1 million. A 16-inch shell cost a tiny fraction of that, and a battleship carried over 1,000 of them. Every few years, someone in Washington would float the idea: bring them back. And every few years, the Navy would explain why it couldn't. The ships were too old, the crews too big, the 16-inch shells no longer in production. But the underlying hunger never went away. The dream of a modern battleship just kept waiting for someone bold enough to say it out loud. And in December of 2025, someone did. On December 22, 2025, President Trump announced the Golden Fleet, and at its center, something no leader had proposed in 80 years: a battleship, a brand new one, the Trump class, officially designated BBG-X. The first ship to be named USS Defiant. But make no mistake, this is not your grandfather's battleship. Let me show you what the Navy is actually describing. The Trump class would run between 840 and 880 feet long, similar in length to the old Iowas, but the displacement would be over 35,000 tons, lighter than the World War II ships. And the crew? Where the old Iowa needed around 1,800 sailors, the Trump class is designed to run with as few as 650 to 800. Thanks to automation. The BBG designation tells the whole story. BB for battleship, G for guided missile, and X because the design isn't finished yet. This wouldn't be a ship built around 9 giant guns. It would be built around missiles, 128 vertical launch cells, a staggering arsenal. And here's the headline that surprised everyone. The Navy confirmed in 2026 that the Trump class would be nuclear powered, driven by the same type of reactor as a Ford-class supercarrier. A nuclear battleship, the first America has ever planned. The ambition is staggering too. The Navy says it wants a fleet of 15 of these ships by 2056. So if it's not about the big guns anymore, what's the point of a modern battleship? Good question. And this is where it gets interesting. The Navy's leadership has laid out the case. As the old Ticonderoga-class cruisers retire, the Navy is losing something critical. Big, survivable ships that can act as command centers for an entire strike group and carry a huge number of missile cells. The Trump class is meant to fill that gap. A true command flagship that can see the whole battle and direct dozens of other ships, manned and unmanned, at once. Picture a ship with an enormous magazine of vertical launch cells. Room for hypersonic missiles, cruise missiles, air defense interceptors, maybe even directed energy weapons, and a future nuclear-capable cruise missile. A floating fortress, yes, but a fortress that fights with missiles traveling thousands of miles an hour, not shells. The hull's sheer size means enormous electrical power for radars like the advanced Spy-6, and room to grow over decades. To put it in perspective, a modern destroyer displaces under 10,000 tons. This ship would be over 35,000. It would be the largest surface warship America has built since World War II that isn't an aircraft carrier. Rear Admiral Derek Trink put it plainly, the old battleships are obsolete, but the Trump class is a different kind of vessel entirely, one built for modern war, not nostalgia. That's the pitch. The reality? A lot messier. Now for the hard part, because every great pitch has a catch, and this one has two. First, the cost. Estimates for the first Trump-class ship run anywhere from $13 to $21 billion, as much as or more than a Ford-class supercarrier, for one ship. Critics argue that money could buy a lot of submarines, destroyers, and unmanned vessels instead. Second, and bigger, survivability. We live in the age of the anti-ship missile and the hypersonic weapon, and critics make a brutal point. A huge, expensive battleship isn't just a fortress, it's a target. The whole reason the navies of the world stopped building them is that armor can't stop a modern missile. As one analyst put it, in today's war, the best way for a ship to survive isn't to take the hit, it's to not be hit at all. And then there's the simplest problem of all. America's shipyards are already stretched to the breaking point building carriers and submarines. The Navy says it needs to hire 250,000 more workers over the next decade just to keep up, and 1/4 of the workers it already has will be eligible to retire within 5 years. And now it gets worse because the battleship is nuclear. Only 2 shipyards in America can build nuclear-powered warships, and they're already buried building the Ford-class carriers and the submarine fleet. Critics warn that piling a nuclear battleship on top could push the carriers, already running years late, even further behind. The Navy already canceled one troubled new warship, the Constellation-class frigate, after it ran badly over budget. So who's right? So where does that leave us? Right in the middle of a fight that's happening right now, in the summer of 2026. Not on the ocean, but in Congress. And this is the part most people have completely missed. The money is real. About $1 billion sits in the 2027 defense bill just to start the design, part of a program that could top $43 billion. The first ship, the Defiant, is slated to be ordered in 2028 and delivered around 2036. But Congress is not letting it sail quietly. Lawmakers have moved to block construction of the lead ship until the Navy can prove its fancy new weapons, the railgun, the lasers, actually work. One congressman tried to kill the funding outright and hand the money to drones instead. The vote failed by just 26 to 30, that close. And the fight got personal. The Navy secretary who dreamed up this battleship, John Phelan, was fired in April, reportedly because he couldn't keep it on the president's aggressive schedule. The biggest fear in Washington? That only 2 shipyards in the country can build nuclear ships, and that this battleship could drag down the carriers and submarines America already desperately needs. So this isn't settled history, it's being decided right now. But I keep coming back to one thing. 4 times in the 20th century, the world declared the battleship dead. 4 times America pulled those ships back out of retirement, because when the shooting started, there was simply nothing else that could do the job. The battleship has a way of refusing to stay buried. My own take? The critics are right that armor alone can't win a modern war, but they may be underrating what a massive, deep magazine of missiles on one survivable hull could mean in a long fight in the Pacific. The side that can keep shooting when everyone else runs low tends to be the side still standing. Whether that's worth $20 billion, that's the real argument, and it's a fair one to have. Maybe the Trump class never gets built. Or maybe America is about to prove one more time that the biggest, toughest ship in the fight still has a place on the open ocean. Either way, one thing is certain: the legend of the American battleship is not finished yet. If you got something out of this, do me a favor, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the ships and the history that built the US Navy. I'll see you in the next one.